Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is Tom Reynolds. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Export Solutions. And I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, which we call the best webinar you will ever attend about export control. One of the reasons we think it's the best webinar is because it's free, which is always nice. And we do have a series of free webinars that we offer throughout the year. We never charge for our sessions, and so this is an opportunity for us to impart some expertise to you and hopefully help you learn things. The other reason that it's one of the best is it's our longest running webinar. So we've been doing this particular presentation for probably 5 years now, maybe 6 years, and it's always very highly attended, and we get a lot of high ratings on it from people. So this webinar, I will tell you, is geared at a very basic level. It starts with the assumption that most of the people on this call don't have any idea about export control regulations, and we build up from there. So if you're still trying to figure out what ITAR stands for, or you've never heard of the EAR before, you're in the right place. This is the right session for you. If, however, you've got 30 years of experience doing trade compliance, then you're probably going to be bored for the next hour and a half. So I just want to give you that heads up that this is a basic session, and we're welcome everybody who's joining today. I'm going to spend the first few minutes going through a couple of housekeeping items, and then I'll introduce our speaker, and then we can go from there. The first thing that I want to talk about is just the go-to webinar environment, which you all are in right now. We've got everyone muted, and we're going to keep it muted for the whole session. The reason that we do that is we found that it just helps to make the thing go smoother and avoid any inadvertent distractions and that sort of thing. However, if you would like to talk with us, we do want to have dialogue with you. We want to be able to answer questions and hear from you. And the best way to do that is through the questions toolbar that you'll see. There's a little box on your toolbar to the right of your screen for GoToWebinar. You can type questions into there. We'll be reviewing those throughout the session. There'll be a few points throughout the slides where we stop and have a chance to address those questions. And then the other option is there's a chat feature as well. So if you have a question or you want to comment to us, I would suggest using the chat feature or the Q&A box, and we will pause throughout this session and respond. The other piece of it too is that we're connected through audio. So for those of you who can hear my voice and can see the slides, that's great. If you can't, we've got this slide up here which has the audio information. Sometimes I will say it's easier to dial in through the phone than it is through mic and speakers. So some of you may be trying to connect through your computer microphone and speakers, and we've had limited success with that. But if you dial this phone number and the access code provided for the telecon, that usually seems to work pretty well. One of the questions that we always get from people is, will we receive a copy of the slides? And I like to answer that question up front because the answer is yes, you will get a copy of these slides. The way to do that is to go onto our website. Typically within 1 week of this session, so by next Wednesday, we will have posted not only a copy of the slides that you can download, but we're also recording this session. So for anybody who can't make it, we've already had a couple people that have emailed me this morning that says that they were registered for this session and they can't make it. By next week, you'll be able to go onto our website and you can view a recording of this entire presentation with the slides and audio and everything. The only thing that we ask about the slides is that you keep them for your internal company use only. Of course, you're not authorized to sell them or transfer them to anybody else outside of your organization because they are copyrighted to Export Solutions. So this next slide talks about the next webinar that we have coming up. As I mentioned, we do have a series of free webinars that we offer throughout the year. I think we've done 6 this year, or we have us on schedule to do 6. Maybe it's 4. I can't exactly remember the schedule. But the next one, at any rate, coming up is going to be about classification. Any of you who have been in trade compliance know that this is everyone's favorite subject. It's often the most difficult, or one of the most difficult aspects of trade compliance. is making sure that your product is classified correctly. So we're going to spend a webinar on December 9th talking about the role of classification and going through some exercises and explaining how to classify items. I will say that these webinars are limited to 100 people. That's the most that we can offer for free, and they fill up quickly. There's already about 35 people registered for the December 9th session. So if this is something that you're interested in or you think would be valuable, I would recommend you sign up sooner rather than later so that you do get a spot. But if you're not able to make it or for whatever reason that doesn't work out, like I said, we do record each of these and we post those recordings through our YouTube channel on our website. So you can actually go onto the website, this link shown now, and you can look at all of our past webinars. We have many of them on a variety of different subjects, and you can view those and download those slides if you'd like. So the next step for today is I'd like to introduce today's speaker who's going to be taking us through this material. Ray Castagnero is a senior consultant for trade compliance for Export Solutions. And I'll just give you a little bit of background about Ray and then turn it over to him and he can start going through the material. Ray has almost 30 years of experience in trade compliance, working in a variety of roles, including empowered official. He's a certified professional contracts manager. He's been in program management and a U.S. government contracting policy officer. His specific expertise is centered around ITAR, EAR, OFAC, NAFTA, and ATF or BATFE regulations. He's also a subject matter expert in the FAR and DFAR supplements for government contracts. And some of Ray's core competencies or skills, I think, are around training, providing training to companies and individuals, creating and improving upon compliance programs, doing audits and assessments of compliance programs, and also working with companies on voluntary disclosures and cleaning up past mistakes. During his 30-year career working in this field, Ray's background has taken him to a lot of different companies, a lot of different industries, but a lot of those are centered around highly technical products, as you can imagine. Those include things like aircraft, infrared technology, night vision, targeting, and surveillance systems. And Ray does hold a top secret security clearance with the government. Ray graduated from Rutgers University, and he served in the United States Air Force, flying a variety of fighter aircraft. He completed his career in the Air Force by retiring with honorable service as a lieutenant colonel in 2003, and we thank Ray for his service. And if you ever get the chance to meet him, he has a lot of interesting and cool fighter pilot stories, which I always enjoy hearing. So thanks for that, Ray. Ray's also a member of the Society for International Affairs and the National Contract Management Association, and he joins us today from North Richland Hills, Texas, outside of Dallas. And I'm in Orlando, where it is hot. I don't know what the weather's like there, but we're probably competing against each other for heat right now. How's it going, Ray?
It's going fine, Tom. Thanks for the introduction. It's hot and muggy here, and it rained just enough to raise the humidity, so it feels like Orlando now.
Okay. Great. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, very welcome. Are we ready to get started here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Tom did all the introductions and everything, so I think we'll just go ahead and get right into this. Why is export control such a big issue? They've been around for more than 30 years, so I've been around for most of the time it's been around. The ITAR actually became law in 1976. There were other controls prior to that, but they were codified and firmed up, if you will, about 30 years ago, a little more than 30 years ago. But why is there a sudden interest? Well, some of the reasons are 9/11, 2001 changed everything everywhere, at least certainly from the United States perspective. So a lot of emphasis has been placed on it. Frankly, a lot of people got a little bit lax with the ITAR and the EAR, and the government tightened it up a little bit. It got very, very restrictive, and now it's starting to be reformed. We'll talk a little bit about that when the time comes, where it's So it makes more business sense for people, and it's easier to follow the regulations if you know what they are and what the limitations are, et cetera. So all in all, it's a good thing. Of course, the government does impose fines and penalties. We'll talk about those in a few slides from now. These, the ITAR and EAR requirements, any kind of export compliance requirements, are mandatory flow downs from prime contractors and OEMs. If you have a government contract, U.S. government contract, it's certainly going to have ITAR and EAR clauses in it, and they are mandatory flow downs. So all in all, if you deal in this type of environment, whether it's defense, high technology, various other things, space technology, you definitely you want to make sure that you understand the regulations and what they allow and what they do not allow. Okay, why it's become such a big issue? You know, we sort of talked about it's kind of always been a big issue, but there's a lot of emphasis on it now. A lot more people are in the game, as we call it, in the export compliance world. Trade goes across borders all the time, probably more so than ever in our history. And we've got trading partners all over the world. Some of them are good guy countries, some of them are bad guy countries, some of them you're never quite sure where they are. So it's a very, very big issue. There are people you can export to, some you can't. The most are in the middle where you can, but you need some kind of authorization to do so. We're going to talk about what your risks are if you don't do it properly. What are the basics you need to get started if you're just starting out in the export world. We'll give you an introduction to what you need to get started. How will you benefit by addressing this issue? Believe it or not, it is a value add to companies, and we hope we can convey that to you. And then, you know, what your next steps are to proceed through this. Okay. We'll assume that, as Tom had said earlier in the introductory part of this, that you're here, you know, for the first time. You're just getting into the export compliance world, et cetera. So this is where you are at the very beginning of the spectrum. No knowledge, no system in place, no compliance, and possible violations. We find out with clients that the more they learn up front, the more they start realizing, you know what, we think we've been doing something wrong up until this point. And that's where, you know, we can step in and certainly help you to address these things. So your risk of violations really is this huge unknown going forward. In fact, the far end of the spectrum to the right, we don't even know how far that goes out. So as you can see, if you're at the very beginning of this, you know, the green is, I guess, you know, good business and what you're doing now, what you're enjoying right now. The big pink football there is really kind of a vast unknown. It's like lifting up a rock and you don't know what's going to be under it in many cases. Now, where's your company? If you have some understanding, a partial system, some basic compliance, again, potential violations you may or may not be aware of, you're probably, you know, midway up the spectrum, which is where hopefully at the very minimal your company is. And of course, the big difference is the big green box. You know, in this case, green is good, and the reddish color is badness. If you had your due diligence up front, your risk, the little risk football on the right, gets smaller. And that's what this really is all about. There's a couple of big takeaways in this training and in what we do. And one of those is, you know, due diligence and reasonable care. And those are trades of art that the government actually uses in the case of violations and things. You know, due diligence usually is in the case of if you're going to acquire another company or if you've been acquired by somebody, both parties do their due diligence to make sure that they know exactly what they're inheriting, what they're buying, et cetera. You know, remember, at some point when the dust settles and two companies have merged or one's taken over the other, one is going to be the successor of interest for all violations and problems, and you know, the one with the surviving registration is going to prevail, but they're also going to wind up having all these problems if they didn't address them in the due diligence phase. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the green part of the slide larger and larger for you, and the pink side part of the slide smaller and smaller. Now, of course, when you have a good program and you move yourself way to the right of the scale, and our goal really is to get our clients, you know, as close as we can to that right-hand wall. But when you have full understanding and fully implemented system, you're in compliance and violations are minimized. Although it's not on the slide per se, also any past discrepancies and violations will have been mitigated by this point. And then, you know, you go forth and sin no more. And that's really the goal of where we want all of our clients to be. and of course, lots of due diligence, very little risk. The risk bubble never goes away completely because there are new things that happen every day. No system is going to be perfect where you're going to have zero risk at all times. Just running a business in and of itself is balancing risks and rewards. And the thing is, if you have full understanding, a good system, you're in compliance as much as as humanly possible, violations are minimized. Your risk is going to be much, much lower. And the big thing is, even those risks can be mitigated further so that if you have a violation, you'll know how to disclose it, how to deal with it, and basically you have an administrative problem to fix between you and the government, and you move on, you go your merry way, and nobody gets into big trouble. Okay, as I said, there's no foolproof system. It's probably not practical. There is that trade-off between risk versus reward. People are involved. They make mistakes. We're not robots yet. Some of you might be aspiring to that, but I'm certainly not one. And people do make mistakes. We make them all the time. We make them every day. That's how we learn. Once again, mitigation is a real key to all of this. If you can mitigate the risk and the mistakes, you're doing really well. If you have a good system in place, an export compliance system, processes, procedures, checks and balances, you're going to catch mistakes in most circumstances. If your employees are trained, your company has taken reasonable care with how it conducts itself, you're going to have employees who are vigilant. They're going to see mistakes possibly before they happen. They'll feel free and empowered to point out to their supervisors or their managers, hey, I think this might be a violation if we do it this way. And you pat them on the back and say, good catch, we'll fix that, and we move on. You really do want to have an environment where compliance is woven into the fabric of the business model, and it absolutely helps to do that. A good system will make prompt and accurate disclosures to the government. The key is to keep it voluntary, is to make it voluntary, keep it voluntary, because for once the government steps in and let's say they catch a shipment at the border or whatever, there's a violation, you kind of lose that the privilege of that voluntary disclosure scenario where the government works with you, directs you, gives you questions that you answer. You show them how you've mitigated the problem, how you've resolved it, and then they basically say, okay, and nobody gets fined, nobody gets imprisoned, nobody gets debarred. That's how you want to keep it. So just think voluntary disclosure, voluntary self-disclosures. They go by different names, different agencies, but it's all the same kind of thing. The government can't catch everybody at all times, but when they do, they can be pretty severe. So you want to be able to catch your mistakes, catch them early, fix them early, disclose it, and move on. Potential for fines and penalties will be greatly reduced, of course, if you keep it voluntary. And due diligence and reasonable care. Those are the phrases. Those are the keys here, and that's what the government wants to see. As I said, they know you're not perfect. I just actually yesterday looked up some 2015 enforcement actions. So these three that I have on here, and you can kind of glance through them. I'm not going to read through them, but the key here would be, and these are the three big agencies that have enforcement teams. OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets Control. The middle one is Bureau of Industry and Security, which is part of the Commerce Department. And then the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, or DDTC, under the Department of State. And you can see a $227,000 fine for Guidant Corporation. Alleged, they had to settle allegations violating the Iranian sanctions regulations. That's a bad one. Whenever you hear about sanctions against countries and parties in the world, Vladimir Putin and his cronies, OFAC those are the people who enforce it, and those are the people you have to answer to if you do something wrong. BIS, this is Yamada America. I guess it's a foreign-owned company doing business in the United States. That'll pay $220,000 civil penalty for unauthorized exports, and you can see, it's in connection with the export of diaphragm pumps. I don't even know what those are, but we're not talking about machine guns or bombs or rockets or anything. We're talking about some kind of commodity that was not authorized to be shipped to these various places. And the violations, you can see, went on for 4 or 5 years, and so there's not going to be a statute of limitations. You can see even 10 years have gone by, and yet they're still paying the price. DDTC, this one's This one's a pretty blatant case. Members of the smuggling ring. And these people didn't accidentally do something wrong, or they didn't even willfully turn a blind eye to what they were doing for business purposes. This was an actual smuggling ring, and there's all the names listed. And you trust me, you don't want your name or the names of any of your employees to ever make it to a list like this, because I was able to find this page on the internet in about 30 seconds. So you know, theoretically, if you were investigating one of these people, or one of these people came to you to work for you, you could look up the name and probably pull up this case, which, you know, chances are you probably wouldn't do business with them or hire them at that point. But you can see, I mean, this thing involved money laundering and everything else. Once you get into that, GDTC would be very happy to include the OFAC, the good folks at OFAC, in on it, especially if there's monetary things involved that the U.S. Treasury Department would be interested in, et cetera. So as you can see, they will cooperate with one another, and they'll get you if you've done something wrong. These are some past enforcement actions we kind of like to keep up because the numbers were so high. And let's face it, 2013 wasn't that long ago. The China nuclear industry got fined $3 million for violations. BAE in the UK had denial of export privileges, plus a $400 million fine for conspiracy, false statements, and robbery. I don't know about you, but I don't believe my company could withstand a $400 million fine. But most companies can't. BAE is one of the hugest companies in the UK, but I'm sure it hurt. I'm sure it hurt, and I'm sure a lot of people lost their jobs for this. Aeroflex and Raytheon, two companies that many of us deal business with, both got $8 million civil penalties. Raytheon's, if you note, hundreds of export law violations over a decade. So if you've done it and they find it, it's going to cost you some money. And remember, these fines come right out of your bottom line. It's just a bad business decision to violate these regulations. United Technologies in 2012, $55 million. U.S. Trade Tech Incorporated, $20 million. 20,000. It's of note that up until, I guess, 2012, the record fine was $100 million, and we surpassed that, and we don't even think of $100 million. When you've got a $400 million fine sitting out there, that $100 million fine from 2012 it just shrinks to almost insignificance. So they're getting bad, and it's costing people money. 2011, there's BAE Systems again. That was in the U.S., $79 million for ITAR violations, and it goes on and on. 2010, Interturbine Aviation Logistics, $1 million. They were not a very large company, and $1 million to them is like $100 million to a much larger company. Now, here's a case study. You know, we know some people who were actually involved in the mitigation of this and the prosecution of it. Qioptiq, it was a Luxembourg-based company, had 163 violations of the ITAR. They did a voluntary disclosure to the State Department. And if you read that statement there, this is from the actual case, had the department not taken into consideration as significant mitigating factors, the respondent, and that would be Qioptiq's voluntary disclosures, the fact that the violations were committed prior to the Qioptiq Group acquisition of the violating business unit and the remedial measures implemented, the department could have charged the respondent with additional violations and could have pursued more severe penalties. So they were on the ragged edge there. Once again, when we talk about something that happened before an acquisition or a merger, that's due diligence. You really need to take that very seriously. And this essentially is the case. In 2005, Qioptiq purchased a number of companies from Thales, High Technology Optic Group. I believe that's a French-based company. And one day before the purchase, Thales filed a voluntary disclosure with the State Department related to the illegal export of night vision goggle technology and data. Night vision, by the way, is one of those really, really sensitive areas that the State Department and the Defense Department take very, very seriously. The concept of we own the night as the U.S. military is rapidly shrinking to where other people have the technology as well. Ours is staying ahead so far, but it's the diligence of these regulatory bodies that are really have slowed down the process of everybody else getting really good night vision technology. And of course, there were unauthorized exports to France, Israel, Singapore, and China in Qioptiq. So there were a lot of parties involved. I guess China would be among the worst of those because, you know, all you have to do is listen to the news once in a while to know that China is not always our friend. little more on this. Thales issued third country nationals without proper TAAs in place from the Department of State, and thereby they created illegal deemed re-exports. We'll talk about what deemed re-exports are in a couple of slides, but something doesn't actually have to change hands for it to be a deemed re-export. They treated the items as if they were subject to the Singapore Strategic Goods Act, not the ITAR. Remember, if you are doing business with the United States in the United States or as a United States entity, nothing trumps the ITAR. It is the top thing, and other countries don't like it. Even Her Majesty of Great Britain doesn't officially recognize the extraterritoriality of the ITAR, that the United States says violations can happen anywhere at any time. But nevertheless, since they're a strategic trading partner with the United States, Her Majesty has to accept the confines of the ITAR. There are other unauthorized exports and re-exports to Iran, Cyprus, Russia, Germany, and Hungary. Once again, Iran, those are the bad guys. Russia is perpetually coming onto the scene, especially with certain people in power, where you can get into trouble dealing with them in certain ways. And Department of State charged the Thales lack of proper export compliance system, and this is the quote from the ruling. These internal records describe business units involved in ITAR-regulated activities with limited or no ITAR training and a long-standing lack of support for ITAR compliance. And there's a key there. If you are involved in a disclosure situation or a violation, they're going to look for certain things, the government. Not only mitigating or fixing the problem at hand, but they want to see training records that your employees have had initial training, annual training at least thereafter. They want to see what they were trained to, so you want to make sure you have the slides. You want to have your employees sign certifications if they've been trained, etc. These are things that if you don't have them, it's going to make the government's problem with you much, much worse. And then, of course, they want to see a system in place. And not coincidentally, these are all things that services that we provide to our clients in our daily business. This is what we do. We train people. We make sure they have a system. We teach them how to do licenses. We help them do licenses, etc. And once again, since nobody's perfect, we want to help you to get that risk bubble really, really small and the due diligence bubble really, really large. That's what we're in business to do. Okay, all this was further evidenced by an internal training presentation that advised Thales employees to essentially avoid making disclosures due to the risk of discovery by U.S. companies or authorities. So, I mean, talk about a smoking gun. That's like that magic email that sinks a lot of companies. They were actually telling people, don't disclose anything because you're going to get the company in trouble. So that shows pretty much willful violation right there, and that's something the government does not tolerate. And here we go. Here's the magic email. Corporate compliance officer questioned the need for seeking assistance. He said, by experience, when you call for a U.S. advisor on export control, he'll play by the book and drive you to implement a strict and costly procedure. If you hire a U.S. advisor, you will not finish with the only voluntary disclosure they're having today, but he will push you to clean up all the past. Self-blinding, they call that, willfully turning a blind eye to the regulations, willful violations. I would assume that this person got into a lot of trouble, at the very least, lost his or her job, and may even have spent some quality time alone in a 6x6 cell somewhere. So it's very serious. And here's some of the results. $25 million in fines and remedial compliance measures. They had to hire a special internal compliance officer to oversee everything. So right there, they've got to have a new employee, probably a fairly highly paid one. Probably a retired government person. I say probably, it was a retirement government person. I know him. So that's where we got this information. They were required to give yearly reports to the State Department to outline compliance costs. There's a key. One of the things the government will say is you're a $4 billion company, but if we add up all of the compliance measures you take, including the salaries of the people, you're paying out a pittance for compliance. You've got $200,000 a year for a $4 billion company to cover export compliance. It's not good enough, and they will actually measure the dollars for you. So Qioptiq had to do yearly reports showing that they were actually spending money on compliance. Direct oversight of its compliance program, that's a consent agreement, and that's where the government literally sits somebody in an office at your facilities who will attend any meetings he or she wants to. So you basically have no secrets from the government for a certain amount of time when you're under a consent agreement. So their legal department had oversight because apparently their legal department was part of the misbehaving. And then, of course, on-site reviews of compliance efforts by State Department officials. Think about that as a continuous stream of audits. And if you were in any kind of compliance, whether it's financial, contract, or export compliance, you know that audits are not fun for the people who receive them when they come from the government. If you have somebody, if you volunteer, hey, we're going to do an internal audit, and we're going to hire export solutions to do that, those are painless because we're there to actually help. But when the government comes in to do an audit, it's the old expression, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. No, they're not. Okay, and as I showed you on the slide where I talked about 2015 violations, not only are violations public record, they're easy to find, and you can see the dates go all the way back to pre-1978 violations. So as I said, although the ITAR has been around for 30 years, the violations go way past that. And just I didn't update this slide. We didn't update this slide because I kind of like the way this one looks, simply because when you look at a snapshot of 2012, 11, 10, and 2009, I mean, this company's, everybody knows, United Technologies, Alpine Aerospace, TS Tradetech Incorporated, and there you've got BAE Systems, we talked a little bit, Z Systems, AAR International, Interturbine Aviation, etc. You'll find, you look at these things, you'll see Raytheon going back maybe to 2008 and a few times beyond. And once again, you don't want your company's name on this list because although this slide is just a screen snapshot, in reality, if you went to this website, you could click on one of these, you can read the entire case, what they did and what they were fined and how they got into trouble. So you don't want that kind of advertisement for your company. This is the Department of Commerce's list. This shows you kind of their structure of how they work, but they do have a couple of things you click on. They're free, downloadable PDFs. The one on the left is "Don't Let This Happen to You," and then one on the right is Major Cases List under the BIS. And once again, you do not want to be published in that book on the right there, or the one on the left for that matter. But anyway, these sites, they're real, they're out there, and these violations, everybody knows about them who wants to know about them. Now let's talk a little bit about the penalties. You saw some of the big numbers that some companies were fined. There are fines. You can be debarred from exporting or selling to the U.S. government. That could cripple many businesses. The one I both faced, imprisonment. You can't put a company in jail, but you can put its employees, or any of its employees, in jail. So to me, that third bullet is, if the rest of it doesn't seem to bother you, that third bullet would really bother me. I don't want to be involved in that, in anything that's going to put me in jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit for any period of my life. Okay, I mentioned consent agreements earlier. Government oversight, once again, you want to avoid that by keeping things voluntary. But staffing an external auditor, they will, the government will say, we don't have the personnel to audit you constantly, so we want you to go out and hire somebody to come in and do a constant stream of audits, and you're going to pay them to do it. And they're going to report directly to us, the government, so you don't want that. Boeing on the one of the larger cases, the QRS-11, it's a navigation ship, had to have a U.S. government representative from the State Department at every meeting that they held. So they crashed all the business meetings. Of course, penalties can be civil and/or criminal. They can be imposed against both the company and the individual. So it's not one or the other. And the violations, as we said, are public record. Here's some of the maximum penalties. The Export Administration Regulations at the top, the ITAR is the second one down. Basically, Commerce Department at the top, State Department at the bottom. You can see they're structured fairly similarly, but the ITAR violations are double, $500,000 per violation. So if you have a string of violations that went on for years, that's how you could see on some of those examples how it could add up to hundreds of millions of dollars really, really quickly. So it can really add up. 10 years in prison, violating EAR, up to 10 years, 20 years for ITAR. So think about it. ITAR kind of doubles down on the fines and penalties. On the more sort of esoteric way of looking at this, your reputation of your company is at risk. And as individuals and companies, good reputations and bad reputations follow you everywhere you go. If you're at all patriotic, you could be a threat to U.S. national security by some of these violations. It can certainly wreck your business with all those fines and problems, ruin your reputation. Companies are going to say, oh no, I read about those guys in the paper, I'm not going to do business with them. And then, you know, your customers may not have confidence in you anymore. And I wouldn't if somebody, you know, had a well-publicized violation of the ITAR, or in my case, I would think it would be even worse if I know they violated it and they're continuing to do it because they haven't got caught yet. I'm not going to deal with a company like that as a business person. Of course, as a consultant, we do deal with people like that, but we try to make them not be that kind of company or that kind of person. Okay, we're going to just pause here for a couple of seconds. If you have any questions based upon what we've already discussed so far, it looks like a couple have popped up.
Yep.
Tom, do you want to?
Hey Ray, this is Tom.
Yeah.
Sure. We do have a couple questions from folks. The first one is how. And by the way, folks, we'll keep these anonymous so we can see who's submitting them, but we won't say your name or your company info, just for confidentiality. The first question here is, how do we find out who is on the list of places not to ship to? Is this people or business names or a combination of both?
It is a combination of both, and there are various places you can look these up for free, of course. You can go to the State Department DDTC website, you can go to the Commerce Department's BIS website, and you can go to the OFAC website, and you can look up. Of course, it would behoove you to look at all the sites separately. There are third-party either software or programs you can buy into. One is called Visual Compliance, where you pay an annual fee. And what you can do is you'll type in the name, the entity, the business, the location, everything that you know basically about someone you're doing business with or plan on doing business with, and it will actually search all of the files for denied parties, and you'll get a pretty comprehensive. Ideally, you want to get no records found, but then you can print that screen and kind of keep it in your customer or your supplier file to show that, hey, on this date we checked these people out and there were no suspected violations. And even many of these types, I'm using Visual Compliance as an example, but there are other sites. You can just do a Google search of denied party screening and find out all kinds of things. There are products like OCREs, the product that we also have, where it'll do background checks in the background, rather, it'll do these checks for denied party screening. So if you just start putting together a license or a contract or whatever, you start typing in the names of the parties. If one of them comes up with a hit, hey, this person's on a denied parties list, it'll pop up and tell you right away. So there are a lot of methods to do this. Some of them are free, some of them are not. Sticking with the free ones are fine if you don't have a lot of them to do. But it is very convenient to pay these third-party companies so that you can screen the people you do business with. We say screen early, screen often. Screen somebody on one day and then they pop up on a list a few months later. You probably want to periodically recheck people. So they do exist, and you can go to our website, and we have various blog articles about these things, and there are even some links that we can provide to you. So what's the other question? The next question, Tom?
Yeah, just to add one more thing to what you said, Ray, is I think a common misperception out there is that the lists contain only foreign people or foreign countries, and you can also find U.S. people on the list. For example, if there's a U.S. company or a U.S. person who has violated the ITAR and is on the State Department debarred list, that means you cannot engage in ITAR business with that person in the United States. So, so just be aware of that, folks. That it isn't just about screening foreign customers. It's about because United States citizens and companies can also be on the list.
That's a good point.
Okay, the next question is about Iran. The question is, what do we do if a customer wants to re-export our absorbent packaging sachets with their bulk medications for third-party bottling in Iran?
Iran is kind of a sticky situation. It sounds to me you're talking about medical type supplies, although they are you're not supposed to do business with Iran. You want to make sure that the proper licenses are in place, and there are, you can get permissions for humanitarian and medical supplies and things for just about any of these debarred countries. or any of these denied parties. But you want to be careful that, for instance, if your customer has already identified to you, hey, this is going to be re-exported to Iran, you have a responsibility to get end use and end user assurances from them, and this is to protect your company's interest in this. If they say, yeah, we have all the permits in places, and then a product with your company's name on it is found, in this case in Iran, and it got there without a license, the State Department is going to go after everybody and anybody who touched that export. So you want to make sure that your due diligence includes knowing where things are going to go. If you believe a license might be required, in this case it probably would, you want to make sure those licenses are in place. Even if you're not the person who has the license, you are responsible for the end use of your product. In fact, when I first started learning this stuff, I had one of my mentors said, if you think of the ITAR violations, equating it to litter of some kind, if you're driving down the road drinking a bottle of Coke, those old-fashioned green bottles that don't break very easily, you're done drinking your Coke, you throw it out the window, and then you drive on. If someone finds that bottle on the side of the road, the way the ITAR is written, the Coca-Cola company would be responsible because their name is on it, even though they didn't actually throw it out. So we refer to the Coke bottle principle as, if your name is involved, your company's involved in any kind of a violation, and you don't have something to mitigate it, or you don't have your ducks in line, you're going to get into trouble just as much as the person who actually willfully made the violation. So I hope that answers the question.
Yep.
Okay.
I would say too, just as a general, just to add on, there's been a lot of talk about Cuba and Iran lately because both of those countries have been in the news specifically related to sanctions and embargoes and different deals like that. And Ray, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the most part, it's business as usual right now because particularly with the Iranian thing, there's still a lot of approvals that the government's going through, a lot of changes that still have to be made to the laws before they become final. And I think even with Cuba, there have been some minor changes with travel, but for the most part, it's business as usual for those two countries.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We get calls on a daily basis from prospective clients or people just contacting us. Hey, is it okay? Can I start doing business in Cuba now? And a good rule of thumb is if the country's been on the news a lot of stuff has to settle down before you can start doing business with them, and it has to be official. Just somebody making an announcement, that's kind of the government's version of kabuki theater. Until it's actually codified in the regulations, it is business as usual. And we keep up with those kind of things, of course. And when and if things change with Iran and Cuba as a result of these things, I can guarantee you it's not going to happen overnight, but I can guarantee that we will keep up with it. So yes, it is business as usual unless there has been a definitive, where everybody knows that, hey, this kind of business is now allowed, or this is now, you can get on a plane to fly to Cuba for vacation. I would just, keep an eye on it and don't base your corporate and business decisions on what you hear on the news.
Great. Thanks, Ray.
All right.
That's all the questions we have for now, so we'll just keep moving. And just as a reminder, as folks have more questions, go ahead and submit them through the GoToWebinar interface, and then we'll pause again and talk further.
Yeah, we have a couple more stopping points built into the presentation here. Okay, some of the basics. Now that I've scared you to death and turned your hair all white with the fines and penalties can be, we're going to talk a little bit about the the more mundane, but this is the core of the whole thing. We're going to talk about what an export actually is. So some people are surprised by the answer. We're talking about the ITAR and the EAR, OFAC, all three we've mentioned already, and then product classification. That's we're having a special one of these webinars in December on product classification, and really it's one of the pillars, one of the keys that you need to understand in order to avoid export violations and to be fully compliant. Okay, an export is any item sent from the United States to a foreign destination, company or person. That's an export. Most people know that. This first bullet here, you can ask a 5-year-old and they probably get it right. All items and articles leaving the U.S. are exports, and therefore may be subject to controls and restrictions. There's some kind of controls and restrictions. It just might not require a license. But that one, everybody can usually pass that part of the test. Put something in a box, ship it someplace, that's an export. It includes hardware, information, software technologies, manufacturing know-how. This is the part that most people don't realize. It does not have to be a tangible item such as hardware. It can be drawings, specs, test data, calculations, software. And, a lot of these things can be conveyed electronically via email and everything. The method does not matter, and there are no loopholes to say, well, if I put it in an email, it's not an export. There are no loopholes in any of these regulations. An export is an export, and if something goes from the United States to a foreign person, even in the United States, that is still considered an export. They can be physical, as we said, oral or verbal. Visual, interesting, you're in a Starbucks at lunchtime, it's a beautiful day, so you're going to do some work, and you're working on your ITAR project in a Starbucks. A foreign person walks by with his cup of latte and glances at your screen and sees a drawing for an F-35 part, something like that. Even though you don't even know it, I mean, you don't even talk to this person, that was an export, and it was probably an illegal export at that point. So as I said, the how it happens doesn't make it, okay, that was not an export. No matter how you can do it, overhearing a conversation, eavesdropping, that can be an export as well. So you just want to be aware. Okay, well, with this definition, who and what you do, you really need to think about, even if you don't send hardware out of the country. Yes, that's absolutely right, because as I said, it can happen in a Starbucks in New York City, so that's part of it. And here's some possible export situations or scenarios that people don't usually understand or don't think about. If you have employees who are not U.S. persons, customers that are on the denied parties lists, we talked a little bit about where those can be found. Email exports happen all the time. Phone conversations, regular snail mail, sticking a stamp on something and mailing it to somebody, that's an export. Visitors or potential customers who may be on the denied parties list or maybe from prescribed destinations, taking a tour of your facility. I did a walkthrough of a place not too long ago, and they had these yellow lines in the shop, and if you didn't step across the yellow lines, in most cases it was for safety. In fact, in all cases it was for safety, but to them it also served them well for ITAR purposes, because if you stayed within the safety lines for safety consideration, you also could not see what was going on at the workstations. So a lot of the procedures and processes you have in place for other things can help you with this. But sure enough, as soon as I told them that, hey, these yellow lines, you can use them for ITAR purposes as well, I rounded a corner and one of the yellow lines was like 18 inches behind some workstation where a guy had a big old drawing of an ITAR part that he was working on. And I said, okay, so right here, you're going to have to put up a screen or something or move this workstation, because I could clearly see that what this drawing he had was ITAR. I think it even had ITAR stamps on it. So, once again, these are export and possible violation situations. Information on your company's website. We all know that there are a lot of things on the World Wide Web that aren't there legally. We won't go into what those are, but you let your imagination run wild. So you have to be careful as a company what you put on your own website. Just because you put it there does not make it public domain. In fact, a lot of times your violation goes into the public domain and you do that. You don't want that to happen. Internet downloads, once again, the World Wide Web is so huge, nobody even knows how big it is. And then data on computers, networks, and hard drives. A lot of people don't think about that, but there have been violations where you bring in some foreign partners. Let's say from your company has partnered with a European company, and they bring some of their engineers in to work at your facility on this joint project. Well, you have to make sure you have necessary firewalls and things in place that they can't get to the entire company database, much of which would be protected. So these are all considerations to think about. Your IT department can make or break you in these types of situations in this day and age. Okay, what is not an export is a U.S. person to a U.S. person. Whenever we use the term persons, for all intents, for the purposes of ITAR, EAR, etc., a person can also be a company. A company, person, it's almost interchangeable. The incorporated means, an artificial person created for business purposes. So person, company, same thing. Shipment and transmission of restricted items subject to the ITAR EAR from one U.S. person to another is not an export, as long as the receiving person is not employed by a foreign company. That's the exception. Essentially, it's called the loyalty of the paycheck. If I am a U.S. person, I'm working in the U.S., but on behalf of a completely foreign company, they're not registered in the U.S. to do business, etc., I have to be treated as a foreign person because they're the ones who sign my paycheck. So you have to be careful about that. And we talked about what's a U.S. person, okay? A U.S. person is anyone who's a citizen, everybody usually gets that one right, or permanent resident alien. You hear about green cards. I know they're not actually green, but that's kind of the nickname for it. Somebody given political asylum in the U.S. Essentially, anyone who is legally permitted permanently to reside in the United States, not on a visa, which has an expiration, but permanent. That is a U.S. person for ITAR and EAR reasons. Now, what's a foreign person? The answer to that one is a lot easier. Anyone who doesn't fit the definition of a U.S. person. Everyone else who's not a U.S. person is a foreign person. So if they're not a U.S. citizen, don't have a green card, they're a foreign person. And then when we talk about foreign destination, is any country or company other than one in the United States. Simple. Even Canada is a foreign country, although Canada has rights and privileges, better than every other country in the world. We have a special relationship with Canada. We also have very similar relationships now with the UK and with Australia, our traditional lifelong friends and partners. They're still considered foreign countries. It's just that there are less restrictive measures in place for these particular places, and those are delineated in law. An export, shipment, and transmission of items subject to the ITAR or EAR from the U.S. to a foreign country. Simplest thing. Sending something from the USA to Germany, that's an export. Any way you can send it, even electronically. Now, a re-export, you hear that term a lot. Here's your initial export was from the USA to Germany, and then the German company or person re-exports it to Japan. So as soon as you bring a third country into the picture, in this case Japan is the third country, that is a re-export. Again, not always illegal, not even always controlled, but this is just definition of the term. A re-export involves the U.S. and at least 2 other countries, maybe many more than that. A retransfer, on the other hand, does not require a third country. In fact, it doesn't have a third country. So now you've sent your export to company A in Germany. They've sent it to company B, also in Germany. That's a retransfer because it's within the country. And if it was legal and lawful to send it to Germany to begin with, this retransfer would probably be okay. If you had a license, however, that was only to company A, then sending it to company B, let's say for finishing or painting or plating or something, you could have a violation problem. And thing, even though it's not on this slide, I want to mention it while I'm thinking about it. You need to know who all the parties are going to be to every transaction that involves exporting. You need to know who the ultimate end user is and what the ultimate end purpose is for that use. If you're leaving that part of the picture out of it, that does not mitigate the problem for you. You do have a problem, so you really have to be wary of who you do business with. Several slides ago I mentioned deemed export. It's something that is considered to be an export even though nothing tangible took place. A U.S. person discussing technical data with a German national by phone is a deemed export. So no paper, nothing changed hands or anything. So if the knowledge that a U.S. person has is U.S. knowledge or technology, and it gets inside the head or brain of this German national, that is a deemed export, and something that most people are not aware of. They're also deemed re-exports. In this case, we're using the same countries as the example to be consistent. A U.S. person gives some technical data just verbally to a German national. That person tells his friend in Japan. That's a deemed re-export. Once again, not always illegal, but if the export was illegal, the deemed export was illegal, so would be the deemed re-export. Okay, these are the regulations. We've mentioned them a lot. The ITAR is the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. The EAR, and it's not here, it's EAR, are the Export Administration Regulations. And then we've got the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC. Most people never heard of them until the last several years, and you keep hearing about sanctions and things. That's those good folks there are the ones who take care of that. Okay? If an item is listed on the United States Munitions List, the USML, and it's a list of categories in the ITAR, then it's controlled under the ITAR, and it's enforced by the U.S. Department of State, Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, otherwise known as DDTC. You may see some older documents, ODTC, Office of Defense Trade Control. That's just an older name for the same organization. If the product has dual use or commercial application, then it's controlled by the Export Administration Regulations and enforced by the U.S. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS. If the product's going to a sanctioned country, it's going to be controlled through a variety of federal laws and enforced by the U.S. Department of the Treasury, Office of Foreign Assets Control. So there you have U.S. Munitions List, ITAR, dual use, and Commerce Control List items, we've heard of them as well, would be Commerce Department, and the Treasury Department, OFAC, is in charge of anything that has to do with the dollars and the money and the movement of money and sanctioning of countries that way. Okay, we mentioned the ITAR. It's administered by the Department of State, the ETC. There's categories enumerated, and this is as a result of export control reform that's started really hitting the streets in about 2013, although the process for it started at the beginning of my career, certainly. They're always talking about it and never accomplishing much. Lately, the export control reform has become a very real thing, and overall, it's better for business, and it's also better for the government because they don't have as many things to enforce. But anyway, some of the categories in the ITAR are enumerated, and you'll see that word used a lot, where it'll say specifically the F-22, the F-35, the stealth fighter, F-117, etc. Those will be enumerated. But then some of the categories, especially those who were not subject to export control reform yet, much more broadly defined. And that's where the entire ITAR had been written for many, many years. They're finally getting quite a bit more specific. So the more broadly defined something, the more tightly controlled it really is, because, as I said, they haven't enumerated it yet. So they're gonna take a kind of a broad axe approach to it, and it's going to be a lot easier to make a violation under these broad categories. Okay, and of course, several parts of the U.S. Munitions List have already been reformed under export control reform, and some have not yet been, some may never be. So once again, you really want to make sure that when you're dealing with this regulation, you're dealing with the latest and greatest version. I believe the most recently published one was in August of 2015, which is last month. And we always use the latest and greatest of it just to make sure. If you're classifying a product, if it's on the U.S. Munitions List, it's going to be exported. It's going to be controlled. It's going to require a license or an exemption. There are no loopholes or exceptions to the ITAR, but there are exemptions. But once again, those exemptions are listed in the ITAR itself. This is the first half of Part 121 of the ITAR. These are the categories. There's 21 of them. These are the first 10. Category 1 is basically small arms, close assault weapons, etc. Category 2, guns and armament over 50 caliber in size. And then you got your ammunition and ordnance in 3, and on and on. Category 4 is a lot of the rocket scientist kind of stuff, bombs, mines, etc. 5 is explosives. Some of these look like they might overlap. That's why you have to actually read the USML descriptions, because you may think it's in Category 4, but it turns out because of the explosives and materials, it may be Category 5. Nothing resides in more than one category, so it's going to be one or the other, or it's going to be on the EAR. And it goes on and on. Category 7, ground vehicles, was the first category to undergo export control reform, and that's where they took a lot of armored vehicles that are used by police organizations, and they moved them from being military on the U.S. Munitions List over to the Commerce List. So a lot of things, they're still controlled, and they're still controlled to many of the same countries, but they are under the jurisdiction of the Commerce Department, EAR now. And that was the first category to undergo, that was kind of the test case to undergo export control reform. The next category was Category 8, which is aircraft and related articles. Although F-16s, for instance, an older proven airframe, is still a Category 8 aircraft. By moving the older aircraft, in this case the F-16, over to the Commerce Munitions List is what it's actually referred to as, but moving it over to the Commerce List means the parts and things for it are going to be controlled by Commerce, not by the State Department. Your newer aircraft, the later models of the F-18, such as the EF and later models of the Super Hornet, are still going to be Category 8, as will all parts. But if the parts are used on two different aircraft, let's say an F-22 and also on an older F-16, then they're going to be Commerce controlled. So they're really trying to enumerate specifically what's going to be controlled and how it's going to be controlled. And then Category 10 is protective personal equipment. That would be like your flak vests and armor plates and things. Here's the rest of the list. It goes, you can, when you get your copy of these slides, you might even want to print these out and hang them up on your cubicle wall or your office wall or something, so you have a general idea of what these categories are for. If you notice Category 21, Roman numeral XXI, that's reserved for articles, technical data, and defense services not otherwise enumerated. This is to capture new military technology that hasn't been thought of and placed in the other 20 categories. This has to be determined by the U.S. government. You can't say, well, I know this thing's military, but I can't find it in categories 1 through 20, so I'm going to call it Category 21. You would have to have a commodity jurisdiction that's done actually by the State Department to place something in Category 21. ITAR registration. If your company works on defense items, as described in the U.S. Munitions List, Categories 1 through 21, or perform any defense services, we'll define that in a minute, you have to be registered with the State Department, and you'd have to have a registration number with the State Department. You're required to be registered, and it's how to do it, and the need for it is Section 122 of the ITAR. But you do not have to be you don't have to even plan on or ever export anything. If you work on U.S. Munitions List items in any part of the manufacturing process, you have to be registered. And of course, even if you don't manufacture it and you're just involved in the export, you also have to be registered. So it's either or. Here's a myth, we're not manufacturers, therefore we don't have to register. No, the fact is, manufacturers include everyone who takes part in the manufacturing process to produce the finished article. It includes people who even test these items. There are engineering test facilities that work with ITAR items or USML items every day. They have to be registered as well. And this is the actual site from the ITAR where it says manufacturing or exporting defense articles or furnishing defense services. You have to be registered. At some point several years ago, they actually added the part at the end that's underlined. Manufacturers who do not engage in exporting must nevertheless register. Yeah, so that makes it pretty much clear who has to be registered. Now, this ITAR registration, what does it not mean? It's not a certification from the government that you're allowed to work on defense articles. The government makes it very, very clear. They're not blessing your company to do certain things. It doesn't even say that you're compliant. The government makes no such claims. They simply want to know who you are and what categories of items you're working on. It's essentially the DDTC. You're telling the DDTC that you work on this stuff, and they're, now that they know that you're doing it, that's all it gets you. You don't get to skate on licenses. It doesn't give you any capabilities to do something illegal or to do something that otherwise would require a license. None of that. It just means the government wants to know who's working on its controlled stuff and who's exporting its controlled stuff, period. We mentioned defense services. Defense services can be performed by a U.S. person or company to a U.S. person, to a foreign person, either in the U.S. or abroad. It can happen anywhere. And basically, a defense service is furnishing any kind of assistance, including training, to foreign persons. And here's a big long laundry list: development, design, engineering, manufacture, production, and you can read the list of defense or use of defense articles. The word demilitarization is there because it's interesting. That's protected because if you teach somebody how to demilitarize, let's say a military helicopter, to turn it into a civilian helicopter, the idea is that through reverse engineering, they can reverse that process and they can figure out how to militarize a civilian helicopter. So that's why that's controlled as a defense service. Furnishing any restricted technical data to a foreign person is defense service as well. Interesting that it's one of these kind of unwritten rules. You could take a whole bunch of civil items and you figure out a way to put them together to turn them into something that has military use. Teaching somebody how to do that, even though no ITAR physical items are involved, can also be a defense service. If you have a unique way of putting together Legos that turns it into a deadly weapon, and you teach somebody how to do that, that could be a defense service. So you don't actually have to have actual ITAR items involved to be providing a defense service. Okay, we're going to take a little pause for questions here. And Tom, if you want to please do the honors.
Sure. Yep. Only one question, so I think everyone's drinking from the fire hose, as we call it, digesting the information.
I'll try to slow it down a little bit.
It's a lot of detail. I mean, even though this is a basic course, if this is your first brush with this, it's a lot of stuff to take in. So the question is, a U.S. corporation sends parts to a U.S. person in a foreign country. Is this considered an export?
Yes, it is an export. The controls on it might be different. If you have some method within your company to either send something to a person in a foreign country, let's say if it were electronic, there may be certain firewalls and tunnels involved where it would not be considered to be an illegal export. But nevertheless, the basic answer to the question is yes, it is an export. It's just that depending on how it's done and what precautions have been taken, it might or might not be controlled. So there are exemptions to cover some of this stuff. Just a simple act of one of your business development people takes a laptop with them when they go on a sales trip. Everything on that laptop is considered to have been exported with it. A lot of companies use sanitized. They'll give a generic laptop that sort of has nothing on it except what the person's allowed to have on them in that country. I mean, there's different ways to deal with it, but the simple answer to the question is yes, it is an export, and you should pay attention to what procedures, processes are in place to make sure it's done legally, lawfully, and in a compliant manner.
Great, thanks.
I'm going to step to the next slide here, and I think there's one, maybe two more opportunities for questions. As Tom said, if something comes up even from the last block and you want to ask it, please feel free to use the method described to do that, and we'll try to answer all questions that we can. The EAR, Export Administration Regulations, administered by the Department of Commerce, BIS, Bureau of Industry and Security. If the items are commercial or dual use, commercial meaning it can be used for commercial and military purposes, it's controlled by the EAR and administered by the BIS. Many items are subject to the EAR but do not necessarily require a license for export. The EAR is much more complex in how it handles things. I like to say, just as if you're a visually oriented kind of person like I am, if you had a printed copy of the entire ITAR on 8.5 by 11 size, normal paper, the entire regulation might be 3/4 of an inch to an inch thick. If you had same font, same size paper, everything, the entire EAR, it would probably be a stack of books, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, as opposed to an inch. So that's because you got to realize the ITAR controls U.S. munitions items. The EAR addresses, doesn't always fully control, but addresses everything else. I mean, literally from Boeing 787 airliners down to paper clips. Spoiler alert, paper clips are really not controlled, but they're in there. I mean, they're EAR 99 items. They're addressed. They're addressed in as much as we're not going to worry about these. But that's just to give you the example that everything that isn't on the U.S. munitions list somehow, some way is addressed in the EAR, even if it's addressed in saying, if you can't find it here, it's just generic EAR 99. So that would be like the paperclip item. The Commerce Control List, think of that as what the U.S. Munitions List is in the ITAR, the Commerce Control List is in the EAR. There's 5 basic product groups. Makes it sound simple, but once again, as I said, it handles everything. Within those 5 product groups is everything in the world. It's an extensive system for classification of products, and the result is an export control classification number, an ECCN. There are very complex rules about what requires a license and what does not. Depends on the product, its ECCN, the technology involved, its end use, and also the countries that may be involved in it. So it's something to consider. ECCNs, it's to clearly identify the component material or technology so that proper licenses, restrictions, and exceptions may be applied. If you recall earlier, I mentioned there are exemptions in the ITAR. Well, there are exceptions in the EAR. So exemptions ITAR, exceptions EAR, and try not to confuse the two. If you're going to export items under the EAR, you have to know the ECCN, and that's what we talk about classifying your products. That's like the foundation you're going to build your compliance house on, is making sure you have everything classified properly. Here's some examples. 9A991 is the ECCN for aircraft and gas turbine engines not controlled by 9A001 or 9A101. This is a really good example of how the EAR can be somewhat confusing, because now here you've looked up an aircraft, oh, it's 9A991, and it says, but not controlled, so now you're going to have to go to 9A001 and 9A101 and see what's enumerated in them to make sure you're not captured under those ECCNs. 9A992 is complete canopies, harnesses, and electronic release mechanisms. Again, it's aircraft related, but it's a little bit more specified. And in our more advanced training and in what we do for companies as clients, we actually go beyond that, and we'll actually teach you how to find out what the ECCN is for something. But at this point, remember, as Tom said, this is basic. So we're gonna leave the ECCN subject at that for now. Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, under the Department of the Treasury. Whenever you think Treasury, think money, dollars. That's what they're involved in. When you hear about sanctions on the news against foreign governments, individuals, etc., Vladimir Putin and his cronies, after they annexed the Crimea and are threatening the Ukraine and parts thereof, were placed on OFAC sanction lists. That means it ties up their money. And there are also certain businesses you can engage in with Russia, with the Russian Federation, and some that you cannot. Targeted in particular are military items, things that can be used for military unused, and also certain petroleum industry things, offshore drilling, slant drilling, Qioptiq. There are various natural gas. There are various industries that American companies have dealt with for years with the Russians that are now sanctioned. There are sanctions against doing those kind of businesses, and we get questions at least every week on, hey, I always used to supply this petroleum valve to Russia. How come I can't do it now? Well, because before they invaded Crimea, everything was fine. So once again, it's when you hear sanctions on the news and everything, it's OFAC is the one who are doing it on behalf of the government. It's using our economic force to enact foreign policy goals. Basically, if you don't do what we want, we're gonna strangle your money. That's what it's all about. It includes blocking assets, trade restrictions, and financial transactions. One of the things very recently you've heard is that $180 billion in assets are going to be unblocked for the use of Iran. Politically, I'm not going to comment on that one way or the other, but that's an example of an OFAC restriction that's about to be or soon to be released. Keep in mind it hasn't happened yet, so don't base your business decisions on what you hear in the news. Once again, business as usual until you know positively that it's different. And of course, the jurisdiction of OFAC applies to all U.S. persons, citizens, and that includes companies, corporate citizens. This is a list, and I always like to caveat and caution this. This is kind of a snapshot of right now of OFAC-sanctioned countries and embargoes of various kinds. Not all of these have both sanctions and embargoes, and not all have them to the same degree. This is just kind of an ooh-ah slide with all the pretty flags on it to let you know that these are the countries that are traditionally and perpetually involved in some way with sanctions and embargoes. You should always go to the official OFAC site to find out who really is on this list. They do change. There's an asterisk there for Cuba. We could probably add one for Iran at some point here. But certain activities for Cuba may be allowed if licensed by OFAC. Generally speaking, those are considered to be activities for the benefit of the Cuban people, not the government. So if you have relatives in Cuba, you need to send them a care package. It can be done, but you need a license from OFAC in order to do it. It's not free and open trade. And the reasons for these OFAC sanctions, there are a few, but these are the big ones. Countries and parties involved in narcotics trafficking, non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, that's nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, rough or blood diamond trading. There's a movie about it, but essentially it's diamonds that are extracted, traded, etc., without a whole lot of attention being paid to human rights, and we're trying to curtail that. And then, of course, terrorist-related activities in countries have sanctions against them. Interesting, missing from this list because it's a fairly recent and also it's sort of an oddball, would be the sanctions against parts of Russia, its industry, and its government because of Crimea and the Ukraine. The sanction list is designed to really keep you away from these countries, companies, and individuals and/or practices. As we said, screen early, screen often. The example I like to use is if you were doing business with Osama bin Laden back in the 1990s, he was a Saudi oil real estate tycoon. And there were people who bought and sold and traded real estate in the Middle East under his company. He was not on any sanction list. And if you stuck your head in the sand and didn't listen to a news program or never read a newspaper, at some point Osama bin Laden certainly became a denied party. And if you continued to do business with him, you would be in violation of OFAC sanctions. So keep that in mind. That people's statuses change. When people first get access to looking up denied parties, etc., the first person they usually look up is themselves. It's just kind of human nature to make sure you're not on anybody's bad list. If you have a name that is common, more common than others, let's say in certain parts of the world, you may find that your name is similar to a denied party list, and there are ways to inform people that, hey, I'm not that John Smith. I'm a different John. You know, I'm a guy who's not on the list. But once again, this is what we call false positives, and there's ways to deal with that. We deal with it with clients fairly often. It's important to pay attention to these lists, especially when you're going to hire somebody, when you're going to start dealing with a new customer, a new supplier, etc., maybe even existing ones. If you've never screened before, you may want to screen your entire supplier base just to make sure. There was a company called Rocky Mountain Instruments that everybody dealt with years ago. It turned out they were a front for Chinese and North Korean intelligence, and they were supplying beautiful electronic products, top quality for a really reasonable price, and the whole electronics industry was buying from these guys. And it turned out their sole purpose for being was so that they could gather our electronic know-how and send it back to China and North Korea to be exploited and reverse engineered. And the way they got away with it was they hired American persons, first of all, who did not know that they were spies. So they had U.S. persons in Boulder, Colorado, doing excellent work for everybody. If you think about it, hiding in plain sight like that, it's kind of brilliant, but it's also kind of evil. This is one reason, of course, why you need a denied parties compliance policy. Freight forwarders. Here's a myth. My freight forwarder takes care of everything for me. Well, yeah, that may be true, but there are certain things. For instance, you have to provide them with shipper's letters of instructions, or SLIs. You have to have a power of attorney with them in order for them to file AES, or automated exporting system, on your behalf. Otherwise, you're required to do it yourself. So there are a lot of rules with freight forwarders. They have to be listed on licenses that you have as freight forwarders, because they do have a legal role in the record, or as we call it in the business, USPPI, United States Principal Party of Interest. Your freight forwarder isn't going to get into as much trouble as you are if you're the USPPI on a transaction that goes bad. Manufacturers and the forwarders share responsibilities under the law. So just because you have a freight forwarder, it doesn't mean you can shrug your shoulders and ignore the law. You want to make sure that you know your freight forwarder, they know you, and then you have all the proper documentation in place. Here's some guidance from the Bureau of Industry and Security. Hiring a freight forwarder doesn't relieve you of your responsibilities. Forwarders are responsible for the accuracy of the export information, but it almost always comes from you. It's a garbage in, garbage out system. It may look okay to them, but if you got something wrong, you're going to be responsible because you provided them bad information. Both freight forwarders and you, who you're their customer who hired them, need to be aware of red flags and understand the general prohibitions of the EAR. If these terms are unfamiliar to you, part of a robust export compliance program is to be aware of red flags, things that just don't look right in a transaction. And we have a whole training section on types of red flags to look for. But again, this is a basic course, so we're not going to go into the details here. Both freight forwarders and their customers can be subject to criminal prosecution and administrative penalties for violations of EAR. Freight forwarders earn their place to be a freight forwarder, and they're not dumb, and they're going to make sure their bases are covered because they can get into trouble, they can be subject to prosecution. To some of them, they can just lose their exporting privileges, which basically puts them out of business. So, good freight forwarders are certainly worth the money that you pay them, but you have to be partners with them, not just turning a blind eye to what they do. You have to be able to produce the automated exporting system records for any given transaction. You can find out, there's that link there. It won't work in this presentation because it's just a snapshot, but that's where you can find out about freight forwarder guidance. Okay, Tom, any more questions pop up?
Yeah, I was wondering, this is a question for me, but are there any raycasts and euros on the denied parties list? I've never looked.
No, there aren't. You mean when you hired me, you didn't look me up? No, but I tell you what, the person who taught me how to use denied party screening, he was a trainer, and when I was first in this business, His name was, it's a fairly common name, so you may or may not know the guy. I'll use the name because it's a good name. His name is Robin Black, and he looked himself up, and it turned out the first thing that popped up was there was an IRA terrorist named Robin Black who was wanted for all kinds of murders and bombings and things, and he went through what to make sure people knew, hey, I'm not the Robin Black from Belfast, I'm the Robin Black from Cincinnati, and it went on and on and on. And then one day he was training somebody, and he said, well, and he actually used himself as a good example of a false positive. He looks himself up, and it pops up, no records available. It's like, what? How did that name get off the list? He did some research and found out the bad guy, Robin Black, had been killed in a gunfight with British troops. So if you die, you're not on the list anymore.
That's one way to get removed, is to be killed.
Yeah, I don't recommend it, but it is an option for some people. But that's my Robin Black story. It was funny because it just ruined his training there. After he said, "What am I going to use as a bad example now?" I said, "God, I have no idea." Go out and commit a crime, and you'll. Yeah. Oh, you never did? Oh, it's kind of cool. It's kind of.
Never looked myself up. I've Googled myself. It's kind of the same thing, but with Google, you're kind of like trying to find info, and this is you don't want to find your name there.
You don't want to find it if you look yourself up on a denied party. Absolutely. There are people with my last name. One of them is like a world famous veterinarian, and he writes books about animal health, and he's in Milan, Italy, someplace. But he's not a criminal. He's an author just like I am, so that's okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we did have one question come in. Somebody says they tried to find the OFAC list of denied parties but couldn't find it. Can you tell me where it is again? So I guess there's a couple of places that they can do, but they're probably talking about the SDN list, I think, right?
Yeah, they are. I'd have to kind of get out of the presentation to do that, but is that something maybe that we can, when we publish this training, maybe we can add a little link or something in there so that people can find it when they.
I'll tell you what, for the person who asked the question, if you Google OFAC SDN, like Samuel, David, Nancy, which stands for Specially Designated Nationals List. If you Google that term, it should take you right to OFAC's page. That's one way you can find it. The other website that you all may want to jot down, and I don't believe this is in the presentation, but I've sent a lot of people here recently. It's export.gov/ECR, stands for Export Control Reform, Edward Charlie Romeo. If you go to that website, that's where all of the government publishes a lot of stuff about export control reform, and one of the links that you'll find there is called the Consolidated Screening List, and that's where they've taken, I think Ray may have mentioned it, that's a free download list you can get, but it combines OFAC, DDTC, and BIS lists into one comprehensive or consolidated list. So for those of you who may not have caught that website again is www.export.gov/ECR, stands for Export Control Reform. You can find the consolidated screening list there. And those are the two places I would look for if you're looking for OFAC sanctions.
Yeah, and as Tom mentioned, Google, any decent search engine can probably get you there kind of as a back door. You can always go to the Department of Treasury at treasury.gov, and then there'll be links to OFAC, and it'll be a few more clicks for you. But there are, if you essentially look up the words the letters SDN and OFAC, you'll find it. You'll probably find it in several places actually. So there are some universities that have their own sites dedicated to this stuff, but it's out there. Just searching for it isn't all that difficult. Okay, move on here. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. Well, the next steps in this process of taking a sip from this fire hose I've been shooting at you is to learn more. Obviously, this didn't tell you everything you need to know. Hopefully, it piqued your curiosity, answered some of your questions. But essentially, you want to figure out how your business is affected by this. You want to find out what your vulnerability is to violations. Everybody who doesn't have a robust program may be vulnerable to violations. Some people, have stumbled through it, or you have one really, really bright employee in shipping, and I found this a lot, who's been doing the right things the right way for years and years for the company, but the company doesn't even realize it. Well, you know, that person has to go on vacation from time to time and may retire, may move on. So you definitely don't want to put all of your compliance eggs in one basket of one person. You want to have a robust program where everybody who's involved in this is, you know, aware of and possibly can stop potential violations. It really is a team effort of the whole company to keep your vulnerability and your risk very low. Register with the DDTC if you either manufacture or export U.S. munitions list items. You definitely, you know, if you're getting into this after years and years of doing business a certain way, you want to evaluate your past and current exports. And if you find out that there were violations or potential violations, you know, put together a voluntary disclosure package. It's definitely a learning experience when you do your first one, but it really does help you to understand things better, because the questions that DDTC or BIS will ask you are going to help you build a better program. In this case, once again, if it's voluntary and it remains voluntary, chances are you're not going to get fined or into a lot of trouble. You just may have to change how you do certain things to mitigate what happened and also to avoid it happening in the future. You want to develop and implement a robust compliance program. That's kind of a lot of the meat and potatoes of what we do, but it's very, very important. I'll even call this a spoiler alert. Our export management and compliance manual program it's derived essentially from not only best practices in the industry, but originated with the checklist that the government looks for when they are either auditing someone or responding to a violation. And when they see basically the table of contents of our EMCP, they kind of know what they're going to get. And, you know, it's a lot of, put it this way, if the auditor is looking to sink a company, like, you know, wants a notch in his belt, he's going to decide, well, I'm not going to find anything with these people. And that's the kind of company you want to be. You know, if you have a violation or if you get audited, you want them to look and say, oh, okay, these guys know what they're doing. They just made a mistake. You know, you want them to go look in greener pastures for violations. You definitely need to train your employees. Many of the cases that we talked about where people got fined, it's the employees had no awareness of ITAR. They had no training records, and the people just did not understand. And it's not the employee's fault at that point. It's the company's fault that they didn't train anyone. Market your system. That's kind of internal marketing. Is what we mean by that is you know, let the boss of the company, the CEO, whoever the top person is, you know, put out a policy statement or a letter. Hey, we're subject to the ITAR and the EAR, and we're a compliant company. And you know, you want that pep talk. You want to show that compliance starts at the top and goes all the way down through the entire company. If it looks like management is turning a blind eye to it, the employees are not going to be very far behind in that. Of course, you can always contact us. Even a free webinar may have its price to pay, and that is you have to look at our phone number and our website information here. But seriously, you know, you can call Tom, you can email, and contact us, and you know, become a client or inquire about certain things. You can go to our website. There's a lot of more free information. We have a blog section in there, and we try to put a blog article in, you know, several times a year, you know, up to 12 times a year. But you know, it's, again, these are free. They're sometimes they're kind of fun to read. They have some interesting anecdotes in them, etc. But you can glean a lot of information from all that, and you know, and we put it out there, you know, very frankly, because you get something for free and you may want more information on it. That's why we do it. It's part of our advertising, and we're happy to help. We are in the business of helping people, and you know, if we can earn a living doing that too, that's great. You know, we really are interested in helping you, and that's the credo of how we do business and why we do business. And big thank you to everyone. I don't even know how. We'll just right about out an hour and a half, aren't we?
Yep.
Okay, Tom, I'm going to turn it back over to you for whatever housekeeping cleanup or any other questions you may have found from somebody.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Really appreciate you going through the material with everyone and for sharing your expertise. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. Just a couple of things to mention again, which we talked about. This session has been recorded, and within about a week, you will see that on our website. That recording will be posted there. So if you missed it, you want to go back and hear a section again, or if anybody else in your organization missed this, please feel free to refer them to that. And also a copy of the slides will be available on our website for download, again, usually in about a week from today. So check back there for that. And then just as Ray said, as a final closing note, we covered a lot of information today, hopefully answered your questions. If you have more questions or you feel like you do need help, we are in the business of helping people. That's what we do, and we would like to talk to you and potentially try to help you as well. So please feel free to contact us via phone, email. We'll schedule some time with you, get together and talk and see if there's any way that that Export Solutions may be able to assist your company. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining. Please join us again for a future webinar, and I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and a good week. Take care, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.